I ran to the hospital for my son. A nurse stopped me hide and wait I froze when I understood why. By Nanathi's squeak of my sensible shoes on the polished linoleum was the only sound I could hear over the frantic drumming in my ears. Hospital corridors have a unique emptiness, a sterile silence that smells of antiseptic and fear. It was a smell that was choking me, tightening its icy grip around my chest. My Arthur, my only child, had been rushed here. A sudden collapse, the voice on the phone had said. It was his wife. Celine, her tone as smooth and cold as marble. You should probably come, Eleanor, she'd said. He's at St. Jude's. Then, a click. No details, no comfort. Just a summons, for the 45 minutes it took me to get there. My mind was a whirlwind of terrifying possibilities. At 70, you learn that life can turn on a dime, but you're never truly prepared when it's your child's life on the line. I clutched my handbag like a shield, my knuckles white, as I searched for his room. For B, my breath hitched. I could almost see him, my bookish, gentle Arthur. I would hold his hand, smooth his hair, and tell him that his mum was here and everything would be all right. It's the sacred duty of a mother, isn't it, to mend what is broken, to be the constant, unwavering shore in the storm of life. I had given him everything. My savings from a lifetime of teaching art to help him open his first bookstore. The inheritance from my dear husband to help him expand. I never thought twice. A mother's love isn't a transaction. I saw the sign for Wing for B and a wave of relief washed over me. I was almost there. I paused to catch my breath, trying to compose myself. I had to be the strong one, the calm one. That's when a firm hand gripped my elbow, pulling me into the shadows of an empty supply closet. Don't make a sound, a voice whispered urgently. A woman in nurse's scrubs stood before me, her face etched with a seriousness that chilled me to the bone. Her name tag read Grace. Hide and wait. Please, you have to trust me. Before I could form a question, she was gone, melting back into the quiet bustle of the hallway. I was left standing in the semi-darkness, my heart pounding a new, more sinister rhythm. It wasn't just fear for Arthur anymore. It was a cold, creeping dread. The closet smelled of rubbing alcohol and fresh linen. I peered through the crack in the door, my body trembling. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then I heard her voice. Celine. It was accompanied by the deeper tones of a man I didn't recognize. They stopped right outside Arthur's room, just across the hall from my hiding spot. Are you certain his mother isn't here yet? The man asked, his voice slick and cultured. Celine let out a short, sharp laugh. Please, Julian. The old dear still takes the bus. It'll take her at least an hour. We have time. The guards at the front desk are so wonderfully slow. The old dear, the word stung, a casual cruelty that took my breath away. But I remained frozen, knowing instinctively that I had to hear the rest. Good, Julian said. Let's review. Once he's gone, the power of attorney you had him sign last month kicks in. The sale of the rare book collection is already arranged. The funds will be transferred to the offshore account by morning, and the bookstores. Celine's voice was laced with an eager, triumphant tone that made my blood run cold. With you as the sole beneficiary and executor, liquidating the assets will be trivial. His mother isn't listed on any of the corporate documents. Legally, she has no claim. She's just family, an outsider. I am nothing, an outsider. The bookstores were built on my husband's legacy. On my belief in my son's dream, I had spent countless hours painting murals on the walls of the children's section, arranging displays, and helping him during the holidays. And now I was being erased from my own life story. What about the doctors? They keep saying it's just exhaustion. Celine said, a note of impatience in her voice. Patience, my dear. The toxin is subtle, derived from the oleander flower. It mimics the symptoms of a heart condition under stress. No one thinks to look for it. You've been a genius, adding it to his precious tea blend every morning. the tea. His custom-blended Earl Grey with lavender. I had bought him a beautiful canister of it for his birthday just last month. She had been poisoning my son, my Arthur, cup by cup, right under my nose. It's even easier here, Celine continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. The nurses are so overworked. A tiny air bubble in the foreline, it's untraceable. A tragic embolism. People will weep. They'll praise me for being such a devoted, grieving widow. It will all be over by tomorrow. My legs gave out. I slid down the wall of the supply closet. My hand clamped over my mouth to stifle the scream building in my throat. This was a nightmare, a monstrous, unbelievable plot unfolding in the hushed, sterile hallway of a hospital. My son wasn't just sick, he was being executed. Excellent. Julian's voice was smooth as silk. I'll finalize the wire transfers. I was never here. We never had this conversation. I heard his footsteps recede, the confident click of expensive shoes on the linoleum. But Celine lingered. I could feel her presence just feet away. She sighed, a sound of profound satisfaction. Poor, foolish Arthur, she murmured to herself, so busy with your dusty old books you never saw a thing. You are just a stepping stone, my love, a very profitable one. Then she was gone. The soft click of his room's door closing behind her was like a gunshot in the silence. I don't know how long I sat there, shaking in the dark. My world had shattered into a million pieces. Everything I thought I knew was a lie. My son's beautiful, successful wife wasn't a loving partner, she was a predator. The closet door opened silently. It was Grace, the nurse. She knelt in front of me, her warm hands enclosing my icy ones. Breathe, Eleanor, she said, her voice a lifeline. I know, I heard it too. I had my phone recording. How did you know? I whispered, my voice hoarse. I used to be a paramedic, she explained softly. I saw a case once, years ago, an elderly man. His family said his heart just gave out, but I saw his wife's eyes. They were like hers, cold. Victorious, it was never solved, and it has haunted me ever since. When your son came in, the symptoms, they didn't add up. His neurological signs were off. Faint, but there I suspected something, so I kept an eye on his wife. I saw her talking to that man and I started recording. We have her, Eleanor. We have her confession. Tears of a terrible, profound relief streamed down my face. This stranger, this angel in scrubs, had seen what I, his own mother, had been blind to. Thank you, was all I could manage to say. Don't thank me yet, she said, helping me to my feet. We have to be smart. I've already sent the recording to a friend in the police department and alerted the head of cardiology, Dr. Benning. He's a good man. He's ordering a full toxicology screen right now, looking for exactly what they mentioned. But the police will take at least 20 minutes. We need to keep her in that room. We cannot let her get spooked and run. She looked me straight in the eye, her gaze steady and strong. You need to go in there, Eleanor. You need to act like the grieving, clueless mother she thinks you are. Can you do that for Arthur? A fire ignited in my chest, burning away the shock and fear. I had spent my life being the gentle, supportive mother. Now I had to become an actress. I had to play the greatest role of my life to save my son. I smoothed my cardigan, wiped my eyes, and nodded. Yes, I said, my voice shaking but resolute. I can do that. I walked out of the closet and toward room for B, my steps measured and deliberate. I pushed the door open. The room was filled with the soft beeping of machines. Arthur lay in the bed, looking pale and fragile, lost in a tangle of wires. And there, by his side, was Celine, holding his hand, her face a perfect mask of worried devotion. When she saw me, she rushed over, her arms open for a hug. Oh, Eleanor, I'm so glad you're here, she cried, her voice thick with fake emotion. I let her embrace me, fighting the urge to recoil. I could smell her perfume, expensive and cloying, the scent of lies. What did the doctors say? I asked, allowing my voice to tremble. They're not sure, she said, dabbing at a dry eye with a tissue. They think it's his heart. Too much stress, not enough rest. You know how he is, always with his head in a book. She was already spinning the narrative, laying the groundwork for his natural death. I had to keep her talking. I had to keep her here. I took her hand, a move that made my skin crawl. Celine, I began, pouring a lifetime of love for my son into my performance. I need to apologize. I know I've been distant. I was just afraid of losing him to you. But seeing him like this, I realized how wrong I was. You make him happy. You are his world. I saw a flicker of genuine surprise in her eyes, quickly replaced by satisfaction. She thought she was winning on all fronts, even conquering the difficult mother-in-law. Oh, Eleanor, she said, squeezing my hand. When he gets better, I continued, the words tasting like ash in my mouth, I want to help you both. I have some money set aside for a real home, a down payment, for my future grandchildren. Her eyes lit up with a greedy, unmistakable glint. I had her. She was so blinded by her avarice she couldn't see the trap closing around her. We sat there for what felt like an eternity, two women playing out a scene of false reconciliation over the hospital bed of the man we both claimed to love. I looked at the clock on the wall. 20 minutes had passed, then the door swung open. Two uniformed police officers, a sharp-looking woman in a detective suit, and Dr. Benning entered the room. Grace stood behind them, her face grim. Celine jumped to her feet. What is this? What's going on? The detective stepped forward. Celine Ross, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of your husband, Arthur Vance. The colour drained from Celine's face. This is absurd. It's a mistake. His mother, she's a confused old woman. She's always been jealous of me. Dr. Benning held up a lab report. It's no mistake. We found significant levels of oleandrin in your husband's system, and a nurse witnessed you confessing your entire plan on a recording. They played the audio. The room was silent, save for Celine's venomous words filling the air, confessing her plot to poison my son and steal his life's work. She looked at me then, the mask gone, her face a terrifying canvas of pure, unadulterated hatred. You, she hissed. You meddling old hag. I'm his mother, I said, my voice clear and strong. And a mother always protects her child. The handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. As they led her away, she screamed threats and curses, but her power was gone. She was just a common criminal, her intricate web of deceit torn apart. The weeks that followed were a blur of treatments and recovery. Arthur woke up 2 days later, confused and weak. Telling him the truth was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. He wept, not for the woman he thought he loved, but for the years of lies and the betrayal that had nearly cost him his life. He told me how Celine had slowly poisoned his mind against me, telling him I was controlling, that I didn't think she was good enough. We both cried for the time we had lost. The trial was swift. The recording, the toxicology report, and the testimony of a shady art dealer named Julian who turned on her for a lighter sentence sealed her fate. We learned her real name was Caroline, and Arthur was her third wealthy target. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison. We sold the bookstores. The memories were too painful. But Arthur, my resilient, wonderful Arthur, found a new purpose. We used the money to start a foundation called Arthur's Annex, a non-profit that delivers books and sets up reading rooms in children's hospitals and underserved communities. Grace, our guardian angel, sits on the board. Sometimes, when I'm sitting in a brightly painted reading room, watching a child's face light up as they discover the magic of a story, I think back to that terrible day. I remember the cold dread in that supply closet, but I also remember the fire that was lit within me. I am Eleanor Vance. I am a mother. And I learned that there is no force on earth more powerful than a mother's love. I didn't just save my son's life. I found a new purpose for my own. And that is a story worth telling. Of course. Here is a continuation of the story. 2 years passed. The sharp edges of the trauma had softened, replaced by the sturdy framework of a new life. Arthur's annex was more than a foundation. It was our shared heart, a place where the ugliest chapter of our lives was being rewritten into a story of hope for others. Arthur, my Arthur, had found his footing again. The haunted look in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet determination. We had our weekly dinners, our easy laughter filling my small, sunlit apartment. A comfortable rhythm that healed the silent years Celine had stolen from us. I thought the ghost of Caroline, as she was now known in prison records, had been laid to rest. But ghosts are patient things. It started with an email to the Foundation's general inbox. The subject line was simple, a strange question. It was from a young woman named Maya. She wrote that her father, a recent widower, had remarried 6 months ago. His new wife, Isabel, was charming, attentive, and beautiful. But Maya was worried. Her father, once robust and full of life, was now constantly tired. He'd had several dizzy spells and complained of a fluttering in his chest. His doctors, she wrote, had dismissed it as the stress of his grief combined with his age. He drinks a special herbal infusion every morning, Maya's email concluded. Isabel brews it for him herself. She says it's for his heart. Am I crazy, or does this sound familiar? I read your story online. Please tell me I'm just being a paranoid daughter. I read the email 3 times, a cold dread seeping into my bones. I showed it to Arthur that evening over dinner. He read it, his face paling. He pushed his plate away, his appetite gone. It's a coincidence, Mum, he said, his voice tight. Lots of people drink herbal tea. Lots of older men get tired, and lots of them have charming new wives who isolate them from their families. I asked gently, quoting a line from Maya's email I hadn't mentioned yet. Arthur stood up and walked to the window, his back to me. I can't go back there. We're past it, are we? I said softly. Or are we just pretending to be? Arthur, what if we're the only people in the world who would recognize this? What if we do nothing, and this girl's father? I couldn't finish the sentence. He was silent for a long time, the sounds of the city drifting up from below. What does she want us to do? He finally asked, his voice barely a whisper. We met Maya for coffee the next day. She was a bundle of nervous energy, her eyes wide with fear. As she described Isabel, a portrait emerged that was chillingly familiar. The way Isabel subtly corrected her husband in public. The way she managed his finances with a little to much enthusiasm. The way she always had a plausible, sweet-sounding reason for why he was too tired to see his daughter. She bought him this antique silver tea caddy, Maya said, her hands trembling around her mug. She keeps it in their room. It's her special blend, she says. From a little-known apiary in France, that was it. The detail that broke through Arthur's resistance. His own specialty, his rare books, his unique tastes, all things Caroline had used as weapons. Predators, we were learning, loved to prey on the very things that made their victims unique. With a heavy heart, Arthur agreed to help. He contacted Detective Ruiz, who, though initially skeptical, agreed to do a quiet background check on Isabel. Meanwhile, I reached out to Grace. She was now the head of nursing education at a major medical university, but she made time for us immediately. She listened to the story, her expression growing more grim with every word. The pattern is there, Grace confirmed. It's Caroline's playbook, page for page. These women don't just appear out of nowhere. They learn from each other. The call from Detective Ruiz came 2 days later. You're not going to believe this, she said, her voice grim. Isabel Dubois. She did a short stint in the same correctional facility as Caroline Fields 2 years ago, for check fraud. They were in the same cell block for 3 months. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a copycat. This was a protégé. Caroline, from behind bars, was still pulling the strings, teaching her poisonous trade to a new apprentice. The next call was from a frantic Maya. Her father had collapsed. He was being rushed to St. Jude's, the very same hospital where our nightmare had unfolded. When we arrived, the scene was a sickening echo of the past. Isabel was in the waiting room, the picture of a distraught wife, weeping into the shoulder of a doctor. But when she saw us walk in with Maya, her tears stopped. For a fraction of a second, her eyes met mine, and I saw it. The same cold, calculating light I had seen in Caroline's. She knew who we were. "We have to act now," Arthur said, his voice suddenly firm, the trauma replaced by a steely resolve. He pulled Maya aside. "Listen to me. You need to get into their house. Get that tea caddy. And her purse. Look for a vial, a bottle, anything. My mother will keep her here." He looked at me, a silent question in his eyes. I nodded. I was no longer the frightened woman who had hidden in a supply closet. I was a different person now. I walked over to Isabel, my expression a careful blend of sympathy and concern. "I'm Eleanor Vance," I said, extending a hand. "My son and I, we run a support foundation." Maya reached out to us. "I'm so terribly sorry for what you're going through." She was thrown off balance. She had expected an accuser, not an ally. She took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "That's very kind of you," she stammered. "It must be so frightening," I continued, guiding her to a set of chairs away from the main desk. "The not knowing is the worst part, isn't it?" I began to tell her our story, framing it as a tragedy of medical malpractice, carefully omitting the parts about poison and murder. I played the role of a fellow victim, a mother who understood her pain. I kept her talking, kept her focus on me, weaving a web of false camaraderie while Arthur coordinated with Detective Ruiz and Maya on the phone. 40 agonizing minutes later, Maya slipped back into the waiting room, her face pale but triumphant. She gave Arthur a slight nod. She'd found the caddy and, tucked into a designer handbag, a small, unlabeled dropper bottle filled with a clear, oily liquid. She had already given them to the police waiting outside. The trap was set. Now we just had to wait. Isabel's composure was beginning to crack. She kept checking her phone, her pretense of grief wearing thin. Finally, she stood up. "I need to go see him." The nurse said I could sit with him for a while. This was the moment we feared. The air bubble in the fore, the final, untraceable act. "Of course, my dear," I said, standing with her. "Let me walk with you." As we approached the room, Detective Ruiz and 2 officers stepped out from an adjacent alcove, blocking her path. Isabel Dubois. Ruiz said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "We have a warrant to search your property, and based on what we've already found, you're under arrest for the attempted murder of your husband." Isabel's mask shattered completely. She looked from the police to me, her face contorting with rage. "You," she snarled. "That old witch in prison warned me about you." "It seems she didn't warn you enough," I replied, my voice steady. The fight was over. The poison was identified a concentrated extract of lily of the valley, another cardiac glycoside. Maya's father, with immediate treatment, began the slow road to recovery. The coded letters from Caroline were found, detailing not only the methods of poison, but also the legal loopholes and psychological manipulations. Her 30-year sentence was extended to life without parole. She would never hurt another family again. A month later, Arthur and I stood on the small stage at the annual Arthur's Annex fundraiser. He had just finished telling the condensed version of our story, and now he told the story of Maya and her father. "My mother and I thought we were just building a library," he said, his voice ringing with a new confidence. "But we were wrong. We were building an arsenal, a place where stories save lives." My trauma nearly destroyed me, but in facing it again to help someone else, I finally found the last piece of my own healing. He turned and smiled at me, and in his eyes I saw not a victim, but a victor, a man who had walked through the darkest of valleys and emerged not just whole, but stronger. I took the podium. I am just a mother, I told the crowded room. But I have learned that a mother's love is a powerful thing. It can be quiet and gentle, but when it needs to be, it can be a shield, a sword, and a watchtower. We are all watchtowers for the people we love. We just need to remember to keep our eyes open. The applause was warm and long, but that wasn't what filled my heart. It was the sight of Arthur, standing beside me, his arm around my shoulder. We had lost so much, but we had built something beautiful and strong from the ashes. We had taken our darkest secret and turned it into a beacon, a warning light for others lost in the fog. And in saving others, we had truly, finally, saved ourselves. Of course. Here is a continuation of the story. 5 years is a long time. Long enough for scars to fade from angry red to pale silver, long enough for the constant, vigilant hum of anxiety to settle into a quiet background noise. The Arthur's Annex Foundation was no longer a fledgling concept born from trauma. It was a sprawling, vibrant reality. We had a physical headquarters now, a beautiful old brick building downtown that we'd renovated. It smelled of old paper, fresh coffee, and the determined energy of our volunteers. It was a place of healing, a sanctuary. Arthur was the heart of it all. At 49, he had a gravitas that his younger self, the bookish academic, had never possessed. He managed the foundation with a quiet competence, but his true passion was the second-story program he'd created, which helped survivors of domestic fraud rebuild their careers. He had transformed his pain into a ladder for others. Our relationship had settled into a comfortable, loving routine. He was my son, my best friend, and my partner in this unlikely second act of my life. I believed we had found our peace. But peace, I was about to learn, isn't a destination. It's a garden that must be tended. And old weeds have deep roots. Her name was Clara. She was a landscape architect who had volunteered to design a healing garden in the small courtyard behind our headquarters. She was nothing like Celine or Isabel. Where they had been polished and sleek, Clara was beautifully, earnestly rumpled. She always had a smudge of dirt on her cheek, and her auburn hair was a constant, untamable riot of curls. She spoke about soil pH and perennial root systems with the same passion Arthur spoke about first editions. I watched them from my office window, which overlooked the courtyard. At first, it was just professional. They'd stand over blueprints, heads bent together, pointing and planning. Then I saw the lingering glances. I heard their laughter, a genuine, unburdened sound that had been absent from Arthur's life for so long. He started staying later, long after the other staff had gone home, just to talk to her as she packed up her tools in the twilight. A part of me, the mother who had seen her son nearly destroyed, reduced. But another part, the watchtower, felt its old searchlight flicker to life. I did it without thinking. It was instinct. I looked her up online. Clara Jensen. Her professional website was impressive, filled with photos of lush, beautiful gardens. She had a modest social media presence, pictures of her dog, her hiking trips, her slightly burnt attempts at baking. It was also normal. Deceptively normal. When Arthur finally told me he'd asked her to dinner, I smiled and said all the right things. That's wonderful, darling. She seems lovely. But that night, I lay awake for hours, my heart a cold knot in my chest. I started finding excuses to be in the courtyard when she was there. I'd bring her a cup of tea, my questions light and breezy. Do you have family nearby, dear? Such a demanding job. Do you manage it all on your own? She answered everything with an open, friendly warmth that only made me more suspicious. It was too perfect. Caroline had been perfect, too. One afternoon, Arthur found me in the kitchen, scrolling through Clara's online photo albums on my tablet. He didn't say a word, just stood in the doorway, his expression a mixture of hurt and exhaustion. "Mum," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "Please stop. I'm just being careful," I defended, my voice weaker than I intended. "No," he said, stepping into the room. "You're looking for a ghost. You're looking for Caroline in a woman who is nothing like her. Don't you think I see it? Don't you think I'm terrified?" Every time she smiles at me, a part of me is waiting for the mask to drop. But I can't live like that. I won't. I can't let a dead woman poison the rest of my life. His words were a punch to the gut because they were true. I wasn't protecting him. I was smothering him with my own fear. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I know," he said, his anger softening. "But you have to trust me. You have to trust that I learned something from all this. My judgment isn't broken, Mum. It's stronger. I promised I would try." But the fear was a phantom limb. I could still feel it ache. A few weeks later, the foundation hosted a dedication ceremony for the new garden. It was a beautiful evening. Clara had worked miracles, transforming the concrete patch into a winding path of fragrant herbs, soft grasses, and blossoming flowers. She stood beside Arthur as he gave a speech, and the way they looked at each other was so full of unguarded affection it made my heart ache with both joy and terror. After the speech, Clara came over to me, holding 2 glasses of sparkling cider. "I'm so glad you like it, Eleanor," she said, her smile genuine. "Arthur told me your favorites were lavender and roses, so I put a special section of them right under your office window. It was such a thoughtful, kind gesture." But as I took the glass, her sleeve rode up, and I saw a tattoo on her inner wrist. It was a small, elegant rendering of an oleander flower. The glass slipped from my fingers, shattering on the flagstones. The world narrowed to that single image, oleander, the flower. The poison, the very instrument of our past horror. Inked onto the skin of the woman my son was falling in love with. Clara gasped, rushing to get napkins, apologizing for startling me. Arthur was at my side instantly. "Mums, are you all right?" I couldn't speak. I just stared at her wrist. She followed my gaze, and her expression softened with understanding. "Oh," she said quietly. "The tattoo." She looked from my face to Arthur's. "My mother," she explained, her voice gentle. "Her name was Leandra. She loved oleander bushes. We had them all around our house growing up. She passed away from cancer when I was 20. I got this to remember her." She looked at me, her eyes full of a sad, knowing empathy. "It's just a flower to me, Eleanor. A memory of my mum. I can't imagine what it means to you." In that moment, I saw it all with a blinding clarity. The paranoia, the suspicion, the ghost I had been chasing. It wasn't in Clara, it was in me. I had been so focused on the symbol of the poison that I had failed to see the symbol of love right in front of me. My legs felt weak. Arthur guided me to a bench. I looked up at my son, his face etched with worry, and then at this kind, patient woman who was now dabbing at my shoes with a napkin. "It's my turn to apologize," I said, my voice thick with tears. "To both of you." Later that night, long after the guests had gone, the 3 of us sat together in the quiet, fragrant garden. I told them everything, my sleepless nights, my secret investigations, the suffocating fear that had been my constant companion. I thought my job was to be the watchtower, I confessed, my voice raw. I didn't realize it had become a prison. Arthur took my hand. "Your job was to get me through the storm, Mum. You did that. Now we're in the harbor. It's time to learn how to lower the anchor." Clara reached over and placed her hand over both of ours. "Healing isn't a straight line, Eleanor. It's a spiral. Sometimes you have to circle back to the old wounds to see how far you've come." And she was right. Looking at them, together, their hands covering mine, I didn't feel the old fear. I felt a quiet, profound sense of peace. The watchtower was finally standing down. My son was safe, not because I was guarding him, but because he was strong enough to guard his own heart. He was happy. My work was done. Now I could finally just enjoy the garden. Of course. Here is a continuation of the story. The next year was one of quiet, joyful construction. Arthur and Clara bought a small house with a wildly overgrown yard, a project that Clara tackled with a professional glee that was infectious. I spent my weekends there, not as a supervisor, but as a happy apprentice, learning the difference between a weed and a wild flower, my hands covered in the rich, dark soil. For the first time in nearly a decade, my thoughts were not of the past, but of the future, of what colour to paint the guest room, of the holiday dinners we would host, of the simple, beautiful life they were building. The foundation thrived, a testament to Arthur's gentle leadership, and my role settled into one of a proud, supportive matriarch. The watchtower had been decommissioned, its light now just a warm, steady glow. The man who shattered that piece did not look like a threat. He was young, probably in his late 20s, with tired eyes and a slump to his shoulders that spoke of a long-held weight. He walked into the foundation's reception area one rainy Tuesday afternoon and asked to see Arthur Vance, not as a client, but as a matter of personal history. His name was Leo Gable when Arthur came out to meet him. The young man's weary demeanour hardened. "My father was Thomas Gable," he said, his voice low and tight with a barely contained anger. "Does that name mean anything to you?" Arthur and I exchanged a look. The name was etched in our memory. Thomas Gable was one of the 3 men Caroline had ruined before us, the one who had declared bankruptcy and disappeared. "Yes, of course," Arthur said cautiously. "I'm so sorry for what your family went through." Leo let out a short, bitter laugh. "Sorry, you're sorry? You have no idea." He gestured around the beautifully restored lobby, at the donor plaques on the wall, at the bustling volunteers. "You got justice. You got your money back. You took your horror story and you branded it. You built this monument to your own survival." He took a step closer, his voice dropping. "My father got a 1-bedroom apartment over a laundromat. He got shame. He got a heart attack at 56 that the doctors said was caused by prolonged and extreme stress. We didn't get a foundation. We got erased. So, no, don't tell me you're sorry." The accusation hung in the air, heavy and sharp. This was a side of the story we had never been forced to confront, the collateral damage. The victims who hadn't been lucky enough to have a vigilant mother or an angel of a nurse. Arthur was speechless, his face pale with a mixture of shock and a sudden, terrible guilt. I stepped forward. "Mr. Gable," I said softly, "perhaps you could come into the office. We can talk privately." Leo's angry gaze shifted to me. "And you're the hero of the story, aren't you? The mother who knew." My mother didn't know. She just thought my dad was a failure who lost everything. She died believing he'd let her down. The hours that followed were some of the most difficult since the trial. Leo's anger was a raw, gaping wound. He painted a picture of a family's quiet implosion. The hushed arguments, the mounting debts, his father's slow, agonizing retreat from the world, a man hollowed out by a shame he couldn't explain. Caroline, or whatever she'd called herself, then hadn't just taken his money. She had dismantled his soul, and his family had paid the price. When he finally fell silent, exhausted by his own fury, Arthur spoke, his voice hoarse. "You're right," he said. "I was lucky. It's not fair." "There's no excuse for that." "I'm not looking for an excuse," Leo shot back. "I just wanted you to see the rest of the story you never tell at your fundraisers." With that, he stood up and walked out, leaving a profound silence in his wake. That night, the ghost of Caroline was back in our lives, but in a new and more insidious form. Arthur was consumed with a guilt he couldn't shake. "He's right, Mum, we won, but what about them? We healed, but they were left to fester. You can't carry the weight of her every sin." "Arthur," I told him, my heart aching for him, "can't I?" He replied, "The foundation is built on my story. What if my story is incomplete? It was Clara who found the way forward. She listened to the whole story, her expression full of compassion. "You can't rewrite his past," she said to Arthur, "but you can honor it. His anger isn't just about the past, it's about being invisible. So, see him." The next day, I found Leo's number. I called him, my heart pounding. "This is Eleanor Vance," I said, before he could hang up. "I'm not calling to defend myself. I'm calling to listen. If you'll let me." We met in a small, anonymous coffee shop. This time I didn't talk about my strength. I talked about my blindness. I told him about the years I'd spent trying to win Celine's affection, the 1,000 small humiliations I had ignored, the terror of hiding in that closet, feeling utterly helpless. I told him I wasn't a hero. I was just a mother who got lucky at the last possible second. "Your father wasn't weak, Leo," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "He was manipulated by a master. I was too. So was my son. The only difference between our stories is how they ended." He didn't say much, but for the first time, the anger in his eyes was tempered by a flicker of understanding. A week later, Arthur invited Leo to the foundation. Not for a confrontation, but for a proposition. They stood together in the healing garden, the place of our family's own fragile peace. "My story has been the focus of this place for too long," Arthur said. "It's time we told the other ones. I want to start a new initiative, the Gable Project. It would provide grants and long-term support for families who have been victims of financial predators, families who fell through the cracks of the legal system. And I want you to help me run it. Your father's story, your story, it matters. It can save people." Leo was stunned into silence. He looked from Arthur to the garden, to the plaque dedicating it to survivors of unseen storms. He had come here seeking a battle, and instead, he was being offered a partnership. It wasn't an easy yes. It took weeks of conversations. But slowly, Leo began to see that his anger could be channeled. That his family's painful legacy could be transformed from a story of ruin into a shield for others. The Gable Project became the most vital part of the foundation. Leo, with his first-hand understanding of the lingering, systemic damage, brought a new depth and urgency to our work. He and Arthur forged a difficult but profound bond. Two men from different sides of the same wreckage, working together to rebuild one sunny afternoon. About a year later, I was sitting on my bench in the garden, under the lavender and roses. I watched as Arthur, Clara, and Leo stood over a new set of blueprints, planning an expansion to the headquarters. They were laughing about something, their heads close together. A new chapter had begun. The ghost of Caroline hadn't been exorcised, not really. You can never truly erase such darkness. But we had learned to do something better. We had learned to take the shadows she cast and use them to measure the light. Her legacy was one of destruction, but ours, all of ours, was now one of relentless, defiant, and ever-growing hope, of course. Here is a continuation of the story. The rhythm of healing, I've learned, is a quiet one. It's found in the steady turning of seasons in the garden, in the shared laughter over a Sunday roast, in the growing pile of thank you letters on the foundation's mantelpiece. For 3 years, that rhythm was the soundtrack to our lives. Arthur and Clara were deeply happy, their home a sanctuary of warmth and life. Leo, having found his calling, had become an essential, grounding force at the Gable Project, his early anger channeled into a fierce, effective compassion. I, at 80, was content. I had my family, my garden, and my purpose. I believed, perhaps naively, that the story was finally, truly, over. The past, however, is a patient predator. It arrived not with a bang, but with a sleek, professionally designed website. A young, ambitious journalist named Sasha Reed had launched a new long-form documentary series, focused on what she called re-examining justice, her first subject. Announced with a dramatic promotional video was Caroline Fields. The title of the episode was Provocative, The Pen and the Poison, a conversation with Caroline Fields. The premise was sickeningly familiar in the modern media landscape. It promised to explore the complexities and nuances of the case, suggesting that the original trial, so clear-cut at the time, had perhaps missed the story of a woman pushed to the brink. Caroline, from her prison cell, was being given the one thing she craved more than money, a platform. Arthur's reaction was immediate and visceral. He saw the announcement online and his face, which had been so open and relaxed for years, became a tight, pale mask I hadn't seen since his recovery. "We ignore it," he said, his voice flat. "It's trash. We don't give it oxygen." But this wasn't a fringe podcast. Sasha Reid was a rising star with a reputation for compelling, if sensational, storytelling. The trailer for the episode was slick and effective. It featured a heavily shadowed Caroline, her voice now softened with a carefully practiced vulnerability, speaking in therapeutic platitudes. "People see a monster," she whispered to the camera, "but they never ask what creates the monster. They never ask about the cage that was built around me long before the prison walls went up." The implication was clear. She was going to paint Arthur as the monster. She was going to reframe her crime as an act of desperate self-preservation. The phone at the foundation started ringing. Donors, board members, even volunteers were calling, all with the same anxious question: "Have you seen this?" Leo was furious. "This is character assassination," he seethed in an emergency meeting in Arthur's office. "She's a convicted serial predator. How can they give her a microphone?" "Because it's a good story," Clara said, her voice grim as she looked at the website on her laptop. "A beautiful, successful woman, a quiet, bookish husband, a dark secret. Sasha Reid is going to twist this into a story of domestic abuse, with the poison as the tragic, misguided climax. She's going to use the language of the legitimate victims we helped to give cover to a predator." She was right. Caroline's greatest weapon had always been her mastery of narrative. She had crafted a perfect story of the loving wife, and now she was crafting a new one, the misunderstood victim. The first excerpts of the interview were released online a week later. They were devastatingly effective. Caroline, looking frail and remorseful, spoke of Arthur's quiet rages, his intellectual condescension, and his financial control. She described me as a suffocating presence, a mother who had never let her son go and who saw any other woman as a threat. She twisted every truth into a grotesque caricature. "The inheritance I gave Arthur became a tool to keep him indebted to me. The bookstores I helped him build were a golden cage he used to isolate himself. I wasn't trying to kill him," she said, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I was just trying to slow him down, to make him weak enough to listen, to see me. I was desperate. I made a terrible, unforgivable mistake, and I live with that every day. But I am not the monster they created." The public response was immediate and divided. For every person who saw through the lies, there was another who was captivated by the hidden story. Online forums buzzed with speculation. The foundation, our sanctuary, was suddenly viewed with suspicion. Arthur began to retreat. He stopped answering his phone, delegating his duties to Leo. I would find him sitting in the dark in his study, staring at the walls. The ghost wasn't just back. She was sitting in the room with him, whispering her poison into his ear all over again. "She's winning," he murmured one evening when I brought him a plate of food he wouldn't touch. "From a maximum security prison, she's found a way to finish the job. She's destroying my name. She's destroying a version of your name that exists only in whispers and online comments," Clara countered fiercely, kneeling beside his chair. "The real you is right here. The man who built this foundation, who has helped hundreds of people. That is your truth, but it's my word against hers," he said, his voice full of the old despair. "And her story is more interesting. It was Leo who saw the path forward. He came to the house, his face set with a grim determination. "We've been fighting this on her terms," he said. "We've been on the defensive. It's time to change the battlefield." He spread a series of papers on the dining room table. "I've been on the phone for 3 days. I tracked down the other 2 surviving victims. They've never spoken publicly. They were too ashamed, just like my father was. But they've been watching this story break. And they are angry." My heart began to beat faster. "Here's the plan," Leo continued. "We don't give Sasha Reed an interview. We don't engage with Caroline's lies. We host our own event, here, at the Foundation. We call it a Chorus of Truth. We will have you, Arthur, tell your story. Then we will have Mr. Alistair, the art dealer from Boston, tell his. Then Mr. Finch, the retired investor from Chicago, will tell his. And then I will stand up, and I will tell my father's story. It won't be one man's word against one woman's. It will be a chorus of truth against a single, desperate lie." It was a brilliant, terrifying idea. It meant asking these men to revisit their deepest traumas on a public stage. It meant Arthur had to step back into a spotlight he desperately wanted to avoid. "I don't know if I can," Arthur whispered. I took my son's hand. It was cold and clammy. "Arthur," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "When I was in that closet, I was alone and terrified. When you were in that hospital bed, you were alone and terrified. Her power has always been in isolating her victims. Look at this table. You are not alone anymore." The Chorus of Truth event was held 2 days before Sasha Reed's documentary was set to air. We didn't invite the sensationalist media, only established, reputable journalists. The room was packed. Arthur spoke first. He was nervous, but his voice was clear. He didn't speak with anger, but with a profound, sorrowful clarity. He told the story of his love and his blindness. Then a distinguished, elderly man named Alistair stood up and told a nearly identical story of a charming art consultant who had bankrupted him. He was followed by the son of Mr. Finch, who had passed away, reading his father's own words from a journal, detailing the confusion and shame of being dismantled by a woman he had adored. Finally, Leo stood. He didn't just tell his father's story. He held up a photograph of a smiling, vibrant man. "This was my father before he met her," he said. Then he held up another, a photo of a grey, haunted man taken a year before his death. "This was him after. Her poison doesn't always come in a bottle. Sometimes it's just the slow, steady drip of lies that corrodes a man's soul." The collective impact was devastating. It was undeniable. It was a pattern of predation laid bare for the world to see. Sasha Reed's documentary aired as scheduled. But the context had changed. Her nuanced portrayal now looked like a naive, one-sided piece of propaganda. The public tide turned swiftly and decisively against her and Caroline. The documentary, meant to be Caroline's triumphant revenge, became the final nail in the coffin of her public credibility. A few weeks later, we sat in the healing garden, the 4 of us. The crisis had passed. The Foundation's funding was more robust than ever, and a new wave of public support had flooded in. Arthur was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the stillness of retreat, but of reflection. "She will never stop," he said, not with fear, but with a simple acceptance. "Her prison isn't a building. It's her own mind. She'll be in there, plotting, twisting the story for an audience of one, for the rest of her life." He looked at me, then at Leo, then at Clara, who took his hand. "But she's not a part of our story anymore. We are what we've built here, all of us together. Our story is stronger than hers. Our truth is louder than her lie." I looked around at the garden, at the faces of the people I loved. He was right. We had faced the ghost, and we had not been broken. We had learned the ultimate lesson, that the only way to truly defeat a lie is not to argue with it, but to overwhelm it with a chorus of truth. The story wasn't over, but we had finally, truly, written the final chapter ourselves. Of course. Here is a continuation of the story. The defeat of Caroline's documentary was a profound victory. It felt like the final closing of a heavy, iron-bound door. In its aftermath, the foundation expanded, opening satellite offices in Boston and Chicago. Directly managed by the families of Alastair and Finch, the Gable Project became our flagship initiative, a national model for restorative justice. Arthur, no longer haunted, became a confident and respected voice in the field. He and Clara decided not to have children of their own, instead pouring their love and energy into the foundation, becoming parental figures to countless young volunteers and survivors. My life was full. My days were spent in the garden, my evenings in the warm chaos of my son's home. I was happy, but time is the one predator that comes for us all. I was 85 when the first signs appeared. A forgotten name here, a misplaced set of keys there. At first, it was easy to dismiss as simple old age. But then came a day I drove to the grocery store and, standing in the aisle, could not for the life of me remember why I had come. I stood there for a long time, the bright lights buzzing overhead, a cold fog of panic creeping in, until a kind stockboy asked if I was all right. I drove home, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. The diagnosis, when it came, was gentle but firm. Alzheimer's early stages, but the path was undeniable. Telling Arthur and Clara was one of the hardest things I've ever done. We sat at their kitchen table, the same table where we had planned our battle against Caroline's lies, and I laid out the truth of my own mind's betrayal. Arthur's face crumpled, not with the shock of a sudden blow, but with the deep, aching sorrow of an inevitable one. Clara held my hand, her warmth a small anchor in the churning sea of my fear. "We will handle this," Arthur said, his voice thick with unused tears. "Whatever you need, Mum, we will be here." And they were. They created spreadsheets for my medications, put sticky notes on my cupboards, and installed a smart home system that would alert them if I left the stove on. But we all knew these were just sandbags against a rising tide. The disease was a cruel thief. It stole my memories not all at once, but selectively, like a malicious curator. I would forget what I had for breakfast, but I could recall, with perfect, terrifying clarity, the smell of the antiseptic in the St. Jude's hallway. I would lose my train of thought mid-sentence, but the sound of Caroline's voice on the recording, whispering about poison, would sometimes play on a loop in my head. The watchtower, so long decommissioned, was being rebuilt inside my own mind. But its searchlight was turning inward, casting strange, disorienting shadows over my own history. One afternoon, a volunteer at the foundation, a sweet young woman, found me standing in the healing garden, staring at the lavender. "It's beautiful, isn't it, Eleanor?" she said. "She's poisoning him," I whispered, my heart suddenly pounding with a fresh, vivid terror. "In his tea." Every morning, the volunteer's smile faltered. She gently took my arm. "Who, Eleanor? Who is poisoning who?" "Arthur," I said, my voice rising with panic. "Celine, we have to stop her." Arthur found me there, in the grip of a memory so powerful it had become my present reality. He didn't argue or try to correct me. He simply wrapped his arms around me. "It's okay, Mum," he murmured, his voice a calm, steady anchor. "I'm safe. You saved me, remember. It's over. We won." Slowly, the fog receded, leaving behind a wake of shame and exhaustion. This became our new, painful rhythm. The past was no longer a story I told. It was a place I sometimes unwillingly inhabited. The worst part was the fear. Fear that I would forget them. Fear that I would become a burden. And a new, more terrible fear. What if I forgot the truth? What if the details of Caroline's evil became twisted in my mind? What if I forgot who the villain was? The ultimate irony was that Caroline, locked away in a prison cell, would remain lucid and sharp for the rest of her days. Her memory of her crimes perfectly preserved, while mine, the memory of the woman who had stopped her, was slowly dissolving. Arthur, seeing my distress, came up with a new plan. He sat me down in my favorite chair with a tape recorder. "Let's build an archive, Mum," he said softly. "Your archive. Let's tell the whole story, one more time. From the very beginning. So that you have it. So that we have it. So that no matter what, the truth is safe." And so we began. For weeks, we sat together for an hour every day. I told him everything. My memories of his father, his first steps, my pride in his bookstores. Then we moved to the darkness, the phone call, the hospital, the closet, the trial. He would gently prompt me, helping me anchor the memories in time and fact. Clara would sit with us, taking notes, organizing the tapes. Leo came over and recorded his part, telling the story of the Gable project, adding his voice to my archive. It was a grueling, painful process. Some days I would weep with the remembered trauma. On other days I would get lost, and Arthur would have to patiently guide me back to the narrative thread. But slowly we built it. A comprehensive, oral history. My life, my truth, captured and preserved. One sunny Tuesday, as we were finishing the final recording, a letter arrived. It was from the State Parole Board. Caroline Fields was coming up for a mandatory compassionate release hearing due to a terminal cancer diagnosis. She had less than 6 months to live. As the primary victims, we were invited to give a statement. The old Arthur would have been thrown into a panic. But the man, my son, had become simply read the letter and nodded. "All right," he said calmly. "Then we know what we have to do." On the day of the hearing, I was having a bad day. The fog was thick. I knew who Arthur was, but the context of where we were going was blurry. He helped me get dressed, his movements full of a gentle, practiced patience. In the sterile hearing room, I saw her for the first time in years. Caroline was a ghost of herself, frail and withered in a wheelchair, an oxygen tube in her nose. But her eyes, when they met mine, were the same. Cold, intelligent, and utterly devoid of remorse, she gave her statement first, a weak, raspy performance of a dying woman seeking a final peace. She spoke of finding God, of her deep regret, of her desire to die outside of a prison wall. Then Arthur was asked to speak. He didn't look at Caroline. He looked at the parole board. He didn't speak with anger. He simply placed a small digital audio player on the table. "My mother, Eleanor Vance, is in the early stages of Alzheimer's," he said, his voice clear and steady. "Her memory is fading. But before it did, we created an archive. I would like to play you her final, definitive account of what happened." He pressed play. And my own voice, strong and lucid, filled the room. It was the voice from the recordings we had made. It told the story of the poison, of the lies, of the other victims, of the Gable project, of the chorus of truth. It was a 15-minute encapsulation of her entire reign of terror, told with the unwavering conviction of a woman who had lived it. As my recorded voice spoke, I watched Caroline. Her mask of pious remorse crumbled. The cold fury in her eyes was unmistakable. She had been defeated, not by an argument or an accusation, but by a memory made permanent, a truth locked in time, beyond the reach of her manipulations and my own disease. When the recording finished, the room was silent. Arthur stood up. "My mother's memory may be failing," he said, his voice ringing with a power that filled every corner of the room. "But our community's memory is not. Caroline Fields didn't just try to kill one man. She tried to destroy families, legacies, and truths. Releasing her would not be an act of compassion. It would be the final erasure of her victims. Her poison may be gone, but the antidote, our collective memory, is stronger than ever. Let her die with the one thing she truly earned, the consequences of her actions." The parole was denied. We walked out of the hearing room into the bright sunshine. I was lucid in that moment, the fog having lifted. I looked up at my son, at his strong, kind face. He was no longer the boy I had to protect. He was a man who had taken our family's darkest chapter and turned it into a legacy of strength and truth. He had become the watchtower. "You did it, Arthur," I whispered, my voice thick with pride. He squeezed my hand. "No, Mum," he said, a gentle smile on his face. "We did. My story may be fading from my own mind, but it doesn't matter. It lives on in the archives, in the work of the Foundation, and in the heart of my son. The final truth is this: a mother's love is a powerful thing. It can build a family, it can catch a killer, and in the end, it can even outlast memory itself. It becomes a legacy. And a legacy is something that can never be poisoned. Caroline Fields died 6 weeks after her parole was denied. The news came via a formal, impersonal email from the warden's office to the Foundation. Arthur read it, closed his laptop, and said nothing for a long time. There was no triumph, no celebration. Her death wasn't a victory. It was simply a postscript, a final, quiet period at the end of a long and terrible sentence. The real victory had been in learning to live again, long before she had died. We didn't mention her name again. The ghost, at last, had been given its proper burial. With that final tie to the past severed, my own mind seemed to accelerate its departure. The fog grew thicker, the moments of lucidity becoming rarer, like glints of sun on a heavily overcast day. My world shrank, its boundaries defined by the walls of my small, light-filled apartment and the winding paths of the healing garden. The archive we had created took on a new purpose. It was no longer a weapon against a predator, but a comfort against the encroaching silence. On days when I was particularly lost, when the faces of my loved ones were familiar, but their names were smoke, Arthur would sit with me in the garden. He wouldn't play the parts about the hospital or the trial. Instead, he would play the tapes of me talking about his father, about the day Arthur was born, about the silly songs I used to sing to him as a child. He would play my own voice back to me, telling me the stories of my own love. "That woman sounds nice," I'd sometimes say, listening to the clear, confident voice from the recordings. "She is." "Mum," Arthur would reply, his voice thick with an emotion I could feel even if I couldn't name it. "She's the best." Sometimes I would listen to the voice describe a young boy learning to ride his bicycle, and a phantom feeling of running behind him, my heart in my throat, would flicker through me. The emotion of the memory remained, even when the facts had turned to mist. In this way, my son gave me back to myself, piece by piece, day by day. The Foundation, my other legacy, became something I observed from a gentle distance. I was now its history, its founding myth. One sunny afternoon, Clara wheeled me through the bustling headquarters. I saw Leo Gable in a conference room, speaking with a young couple, his expression a perfect blend of empathy and strength. He was showing them legal documents, pointing to a clause, his voice a low, reassuring murmur. He had become the protector his own family never had. In another office, a group of young volunteers were stuffing envelopes for a new awareness campaign. On the wall behind them was a large, framed photograph of me, taken in the garden, my hands covered in dirt, a wide smile on my face. Underneath it, a plaque read, "Eleanor's principle, the first step to healing is to plant a garden." I didn't fully comprehend that the woman in the photo was me, but I felt a warmth spread through my chest. The work of this place, the kindness in it, felt familiar. It felt like home. My last truly lucid day came in the autumn. The air was crisp, and the leaves in the garden were a riot of gold and crimson. I woke up that morning and I knew my name was Eleanor. I knew the man sleeping in the chair by my bed was my son, Arthur. I knew the woman who came in with a cup of tea was my beloved daughter-in-law, Clara. The knowledge was a gift, a brief, brilliant clearing in the storm. "Arthur," I whispered. He was awake in an instant. He saw the recognition in my eyes, and a beautiful, sorrowful smile touched his lips. "Hi, Mum, take me to the garden," I said. They bundled me in my warmest shawl and we sat on our bench, the one under the roses and lavender. I could feel the weakness in my bones, the slow, heavy weight of my body's final surrender. "You've done so well, Arthur," I said, my voice thin as a reed. "You built something that will last." "We built it," he corrected gently, taking my frail, wrinkled hand in his strong one. "I need you to know," I said, summoning my remaining strength. "I'm not afraid." He brought my hand to his lips, his tears falling onto my skin. "I know." I looked around at the vibrant life of the garden, at the sturdy branches of the oak tree we had planted on the day the foundation opened. I looked at my son's face, a face I had loved since the moment I first saw it, and I felt a profound, unshakable peace. The fear was gone. The anger was gone. The ghosts were gone. All that was left was this: the sun on my face, the scent of lavender, the love. "It's a good harbor," I whispered, my eyes growing heavy. Arthur squeezed my hand. "The best," he said. "The watchtower can rest now." I smiled, and I let go. Eleanor Vance passed away peacefully that evening. Her memorial was not held in a church, but in the healing garden she had loved so much. It was filled with hundreds of people, volunteers, donors, and the countless families the foundation had helped. Leo Gable spoke of her quiet strength. Clara spoke of her surprising humor. Arthur, when it was his turn, didn't give a speech. He simply placed the small audio player on the podium and pressed play. My voice, strong and clear and full of love, filled the autumn air, telling the story of a little boy learning to ride his bike in the park, shouting, "Look, Mum, hands free." The foundation thrived, growing into a national force for good, always guided by Eleanor's principle. Arthur and Clara grew old together, their love a quiet, steady flame. The archive of my voice was preserved, a permanent testament to the truth we had fought so hard to protect. My story began with a run down a sterile hospital corridor, a journey into a nightmare. But it did not end there. It ends here, in the rich soil of a garden, in the laughter of a healed son, in the ongoing work of a legacy built from love. It ends with the quiet, enduring truth that while memories may fade, the love that creates them is a force of nature. It becomes the soil from which new life, against all odds, can grow. 20 years after my mother's passing, the foundation she inspired had become an institution, a quiet, powerful engine of healing. I was in my late 60s, my hair more silver than brown, and the role of director had passed to a new generation. My life with Clara was one of gentle routine, filled with books and the enduring beauty of our garden. Then, the past sent one final, unexpected echo. A university that had been digitizing the old court records contacted us. They had unsealed a box of Caroline Field's personal effects from her prison cell diaries, unsent letters, and the beginnings of a memoir. They offered the collection to us first, as a historical addendum to the case. The box sat on the table in the healing garden, a small, cardboard tomb of her last words. Leo, now a grandfather with kind, weary eyes, wanted it burned. "Don't let her voice back in, Arthur." Not even a whisper. Clara, ever the pragmatist, suggested we archive it for researchers. "Her poison is only poison if you let it touch you," she argued. To a psychologist, it's just data. I looked at the box and felt nothing. No fear, no anger, no curiosity. Her power was a phantom, and I no longer believed in ghosts. "My mother," I said, my voice clear in the quiet garden, "created an archive to preserve a truth. Caroline created this to preserve a lie. The best way to honor one is to render the other irrelevant." I picked up the box. I didn't burn it, nor did I archive it. I walked to the industrial shredder in the foundation's mailroom, a machine we used for destroying sensitive victim statements to protect their privacy. I fed the pages in, one handful at a time. The machine whirred, turning her meticulously crafted lies, her justifications, her final, desperate narrative, into meaningless confetti. It was not an act of anger, but of sanitation. It was the final, quiet sweeping of the ashes, walking back into the garden. I sat on my mother's bench beside Clara and Leo. The sun was warm. The lavender was in bloom, and the quiet work of healing continued all around us. The story was over. The last word was not hers, nor was it mine. It was the enduring, peaceful silence.